Part 1, the confrontation. This passport is fake. You're not going anywhere today. The words didn't fall from the sky. They were delivered with surgical precision by TSA officer Richard Kelly as he deliberately ripped apart a young black woman's passport in front of a line of shocked travelers. The sound of tearing paper echoed through the security checkpoint like a gunshot. What Officer Kelly didn't know was that he wasn't destroying a student's dream vacation. He was sabotaging his own career in the entire security apparatus of Newark International Airport. Because in exactly 10 minutes, the woman in the plain navy hoodie would reveal herself as Dr. Nadia Jackson, the brand new CEO of Atlantic Airways, the very company whose terminal he was standing in. And the consequences coming for him wouldn't just end his career. They would transform an industry. Before we begin this true story of power, prejudice, and consequences, drop your city in the comments. And if you've ever been judged solely by your appearance, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. Airport setting and atmosphere. Newark International Airport Terminal B existed in a perpetual state of controlled chaos. The air held a distinct mix of fragrances, the caramel notes from cinnamon rolls near Gate B23, the chemical tang of disinfectant from overnight cleaning crews, the distinctive metallic scent that only pressurized cabin air can leave on weary travelers, and beneath it all, the unmistakable aroma of collective anxiety, like ozone before a lightning storm. 9:08 a.m. The morning rush hour had transformed the terminal into a human river. Bodies flowing around islands of luggage, everyone moving with that particular blend of urgency and resignation unique to air travel. Outside, a steel gray sky threatened rain, casting a dull metallic light through the massive glass walls, making even the polished floors look tired. The TSA checkpoint stood like an industrial theater stage. Harsh fluorescent lighting exposed every micro-expression, every nervous tick, every power dynamic played out beneath unforgiving institutional glare. It was the one place in the terminal where the architecture itself seemed designed to make humans feel smaller. Plastic bins clattered along metal rollers. The body scanner hummed with artificial authority. Announcements echoed. Remove all electronics larger than a cell phone. Empty your pockets completely. Shoes off and in the bin. The language of command and compliance created the background soundtrack to a daily ritual of temporary surrender. Travelers of all types moved through this gauntlet with practiced resignation. Business travelers with methodical efficiency. Families in controlled chaos. Elderly passengers with careful dignity. All of them temporarily united in the democratic inconvenience of security theater. The checkpoint itself was a bottleneck where status evaporated, where first-class tickets meant nothing, where everyone was reduced to their socks and their carry-ons. For most passengers, it was an inconvenience to be endured. For some, it was where they first encountered the arbitrary power of a system that didn't see them as individuals. For a few, like TSA officer Richard Kelly, it was the only place they ever felt truly in control. Protagonist background on Nadia Jackson kept her head down, hood up, earbuds firmly in place. Though no music was playing, she was listening to the weary parents shushing their children, the impatient tapping of a businessman's Italian loafers, the curt-barked orders of the Transportation Security Administration officers. At 34, Nadia was an anomaly. She was the newly appointed and very secret CEO of Atlantic Airways, the primary carrier operating out of this terminal. She had gotten the job not through nepotism or connections, but through a brilliant career in systems engineering and organizational psychology that had made her a legend in transportation circles before she'd even reached 30. Born to working-class parents in Baltimore, Nadia had been a mathematical prodigy, earning a full scholarship to MIT, where she'd graduated with dual PhDs in systems engineering and organizational psychology. At 24, she had redesigned the entire passenger processing system for a global shipping company's cruise line, creating an algorithm that reduced boarding times by 28% while increasing customer satisfaction by 15%. By 28, she had revolutionized a tech company's logistics division, earning herself both a fortune and a reputation as someone who could see patterns and inefficiencies invisible to others. 9:10 a.m. The Atlantic Airways board, desperate for a 21st century mind to save their struggling legacy carrier, had hired her after an exhaustive search. Old guard airline executives had been shocked at the appointment of someone so young to lead a company with 12,000 employees and a fleet of 137 aircraft. But the board had been unanimous. Dr. Nadia Jackson wasn't just the best candidate, she was the only one who could save them from becoming another aviation casualty. Today was her first unofficial day. She wasn't flying in the Gulfstream G650 the company had offered. She was flying coach, middle seat on flight 877 to Los Angeles. She wore gray sweatpants, a nondescript black hoodie, and a pair of worn-out running shoes. Her backpack, the only hint of her income level, looked like a student's carry-all. She wanted to see the airline from the bottom up, to experience what the average passenger endured, to understand the system she was about to overhaul. Nadia had seen this before. At 22, during her second year at MIT, campus security had followed her through the university library, demanding to see her student ID 3 separate times, while white students they'd browsed undisturbed. At 26, as the youngest ever VP at Global Logistics Solutions, she'd been mistaken for an assistant at her own board meeting. Each time she'd remain composed, letting her accomplishments speak louder than any protest. Now at 34, she didn't fight discrimination with rage. She fought it with power and transformation. She had no idea she was about to get exactly what she wished for, an unfiltered view of her company's operations and the airport ecosystem surrounding it. And it would begin with a confrontation that would change everything. Antagonist profile Richard Kelly was a man in his early 50s who looked like his uniform had been shrink-wrapped around a sack of discontent. His face was a permanent ruddy scowl, and his eyes, small and dark, scanned the crowd not for threats, but for targets. He'd been with the TSA for 22 years, a career ceiling he'd hit a decade and a half ago. Every day was a new opportunity to exert the only power he had in the world. 9:12 a.m. Kelly hadn't always been this way. 25 years ago, he'd had ambitions. He'd applied to the FBI, the Secret Service, even local police departments. Each had rejected him. The psychological evaluations had flagged his concerning power dynamics and difficulty with authority. The TSA, chronically understaffed and desperate during the post-9/11 expansion, had been his last resort. 2 decades of perceived humiliation had crystallized into a daily power trip. The only control he had left was making travelers feel as insignificant as he did. His colleagues had learned to give him a wide berth. The younger officers called him Kelly the Dictator, behind his back. His supervisors recognized the problem, but valued his experience and perfect attendance record too much to address his behavior. Complaints about him were filed away, explained away, or simply lost in administrative purgatory. His physical presence had once been imposing, but years of break room donuts and airport food court meals had turned muscle to flab. His wedding ring had left an indentation on his finger, but no actual ring had been there for 6 years, not since Janet had finally had enough of his bitterness and left. The child support payments for kids who wouldn't speak to him anymore just added fuel to his smoldering resentment. Today, like every day, he stood at his post with the air of a man who believed he was the last line of defense against the collapse of civilization. His TSA badge gleamed under the fluorescent lights. His latex gloves snapped with practiced intimidation as he beckoned the next traveler forward. He saw passengers not as people, but as potential problems, categorized, profiled, and processed according to his personal biases rather than any actual security protocol. He had been the subject of 16 formal complaints in the past 3 years alone, all dismissed or buried. 4 specifically mentioned racial targeting. 2 had been escalated to supervisory review, but never reached any conclusion. Kelly's personnel file contained evaluations that noted his thoroughness and attention to detail, euphemisms his supervisors used to avoid addressing the actual issue that Richard Kelly enjoyed making people feel small. The security line on this Tuesday morning contained 47 passengers. Richard had already selected his targets through practiced scanning: the nervous-looking elderly woman who might be hiding medication, the harried father with too many children to manage, and especially the young black woman in the hoodie who clearly didn't belong in the priority lane despite her boarding pass indicating otherwise. A small smirk formed at the corner of his mouth as she approached his podium. He had a sixth sense for finding people who wouldn't fight back, for identifying those who could be intimidated without consequence. 22 years had perfected this instinct. And this morning, like every morning, Richard Kelly was about to remind everyone exactly who was in charge. What he couldn't possibly know was that his career of unchecked petty tyranny was about to end, not with a whimper, but with a transformation that would ripple through the entire aviation security industry. The escalation 9:13 a.m. ID and boarding pass, Kelly demanded, not looking up as Nadia approached his podium. His tone carried the particular inflection of someone who believes authority requires coldness. Nadia slid her passport and boarding pass across the metal counter. The burgundy cover of her passport was slightly worn from frequent international travel, Stanford visiting professor credentials, UN advisory panel meetings, global engineering summits. "Where are you traveling to today?" Kelly asked, a question he only seemed to ask certain passengers. "Los Angeles," Nadia replied evenly. Kelly flipped through her passport with exaggerated scrutiny, lingering on entry stamps from Ghana, South Africa, and Japan. His eyebrows furrowed with suspicion that seemed to deepen with each page. "Business or pleasure?" he pressed, though nothing in TSA protocol required this information. "Business," Nadia answered simply. "What kind of business?" Kelly continued, now holding her passport up to the light dramatically. A line was forming behind Nadia. Several passengers shifted impatiently. A young college student, Emma Fitzgerald, began recording discreetly with her phone, something about the officer's tone setting off her social justice instincts. "Engineering consultation," Nadia said, maintaining her calm. She'd been in this situation before. The script always the same. Kelly stared at her, then back at the passport photo, then at her again. His eyes narrowed with practiced suspicion. "This doesn't look right." "I assure you that's my valid passport," Nadia replied. "Ma'am, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I know what a real passport looks like." His voice rose slightly, ensuring those nearby could hear his authority being exercised. "This one has inconsistencies." 9:14 a.m. A Hispanic flight attendant in an Atlantic Airways uniform, Maria Rodriguez, paused while passing through the crew lane, noticing the interaction. She'd seen this officer's behavior before with other passengers. "What inconsistencies specifically?" Nadia asked, her tone professional but firm. Kelly's face flushed slightly at being questioned. "The hologram doesn't reflect correctly. The paper quality is suspicious. And your photo?" He trailed off, the implication clear in his tone. "My photo is recent and accurate." Nadia completed his sentence. "Step aside, ma'am. We need to verify this document." Kelly motioned to a secondary screening area. "There's nothing to verify. That's a valid U.S. passport issued by the State Department." Nadia stated 9:15 a.m. Kelly's jaw tightened. This wasn't following his usual script. Most passengers became nervous, apologetic, eager to comply. This woman maintained direct eye contact, her voice steady. "Don't tell me how to do my bomb," he snapped, loud enough for the growing audience to hear. "This passport is fake. You're not going anywhere today." In one fluid motion, practiced, deliberate, theatrical, Kelly grasped the passport between his gloved hands and ripped it down the center. The sound sliced through the ambient noise of the checkpoint. He didn't stop there. He tore it again, separating the cover from the pages. Then again, reducing the document to quarters. Gasps erupted from the line. Emma's phone captured everything. Maria Rodriguez stepped forward instinctively, but stopped short, caught between professional protocol and moral outrage. "Officer, that's a federal document," someone called from the line. "I am a federal officer," Kelly retorted, dropping the torn fragments into a clear evidence bag with exaggerated ceremony. "And I just prevented a security breach." TSA Supervisor Rafael Ortiz approached, drawn by the commotion. "What's the situation here?" "Fraudulent documentation," Kelly reported with professional satisfaction. "Subject attempted to travel with an obvious counterfeit." Nadia stood perfectly still, watching her destroyed passport disappear into the evidence bag. Her government phone buzzed in her pocket, the third call from Atlantic Airways board chairman James Harrington in the last 5 minutes. She declined it without removing the phone from her pocket. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us," Supervisor Ortiz said, more statement than request. As Nadia was led toward the security office, she noted the time on the large departure board overhead. 9:16 a.m. She had anticipated challenges during her undercover experience, but nothing quite like this. The destruction of her passport had just started a countdown, though not the one Officer Kelly imagined. In exactly 7 minutes, the balance of power in this terminal would shift completely. And Richard Kelly's actions would set in motion a transformation he couldn't possibly imagine. Part 2. The Turning Point, 9:16 a.m. Emma Fitzgerald, a 21-year-old journalism student at Rutgers, had captured everything on her phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she quickly edited the video, adding a simple caption, "TSA destroys black woman's passport at Newark." With 3 taps, she shared it to her TikTok account. Emma had a modest following, mostly friends and fellow journalism students, but the algorithm recognized the emotional content immediately. Within seconds, the first notifications began appearing. Travel rights advocate. Is this even legal? They can't just destroy federal documents. Newark commuter. I go through this checkpoint every week. That officer has a history. Future lawyer 21. This is destruction of government property and potentially a civil rights violation. The view count climbed 278, 512, 1,034. Each refresh showing exponential growth as the content spread beyond Emma's network into the broader TikTok ecosystem. By 9:18 a.m., the video had been stitched and shared to Twitter by Aviation Daily. Disturbing footage from Newark International shows TSA officer destroying passenger's passport. Context unknown, but clearly concerning. TSA care to comment. The aviation community, a tight-knit network of professionals, enthusiasts, and industry insiders, began connecting dots with remarkable speed. Pilot perspective. That's Terminal B at Newark, primarily serviced by Atlantic Airways. Their new CEO starts this week. Coincidence. Airline insider sources saying the woman in this video matches description of Dr. Nadia Jackson, rumored new Atlantic Airways CEO. Unconfirmed. Security ethics. If accurate, this represents the most significant security staff misconduct incident of 2025. Passport destruction violates Federal Protocol 47. 3. By 9:20 a.m., the hashtag passport destruction was trending in the New York metropolitan area. News assignment editors received alerts about the viral content. Local stations began dispatching crews to Newark. The video had been viewed over 30,000 times and was doubling every few minutes. Inside the terminal, passengers who had witnessed the incident firsthand were adding their perspectives. Business traveler just witnessed TSA agent destroy a woman's passport at Newark B terminal. She was completely professional, while he was aggressive and condescending. Never seen anything like it in 20 years of flying. Mom of 3. My kids just watched a TSA officer tear up someone's passport while yelling at her. They're asking if he's allowed to do that. What do I tell them? The digital wildfire spread to aviation forums, where industry professionals began speculating about the legal implications. Destruction of a passport is destruction of federal property. Full stop. I've been in aviation security for 17 years. There is never a protocol that authorizes destroying documentation. You confiscate and report. If that's who I think it is in the video, Newark TSA just made the mistake of a lifetime. Emma's phone now buzzed constantly with notifications. Her video had been viewed 87,000 times in under 5 minutes. News organizations were sending her direct messages requesting permission to use the footage. Her journalism professor had texted, "Whatever you do, save the original. This is important evidence." What had begun as one student's documentation of perceived injustice was rapidly transforming into a national story about power, accountability, and what happens when the wrong person is targeted by a broken system. And the clock was still ticking. Security office detention, 9:17 a.m. The secondary screening room at Newark Terminal B was clinically lit and deliberately intimidating. Windowless, camera-equipped, isolated from the main terminal noise, designed to make its occupants feel separated from the normal world. It succeeded admirably. Nadia sat with perfect posture in an uncomfortable metal chair. Her backpack now subjected to meticulous inspection by TSA officer Thomas Wilson, a 41-year-old former military man who approached procedure with religious devotion. You understand the seriousness of presenting fraudulent documentation at a federal checkpoint? Supervisor Rafael Ortiz asked, his tone suggesting the question was rhetorical. I understand the seriousness of a federal officer destroying a legitimate passport. Nadia replied calmly. Officer Jessica Martinez, 33, observed from the doorway, a slight furrow in her brow suggesting discomfort with the situation. Unlike her colleagues, she maintained a respectful distance, her body language distinctly different from the aggressive posturing of Kelly. who stood with his arms crossed, vindication radiating from his stance. The document has been secured as evidence, Ortiz continued, indicating the clear bag containing Nadia's shredded passport. We'll need to verify your actual identity before determining next steps. I'd like to make a phone call, Nadia said. This isn't a police station, ma'am, Kelly interjected with a smirk. You don't get a phone call. Actually, Martinez spoke up hesitantly. There's no regulation preventing a detained passenger from using their phone before formal processing begins. Kelly shot her a look that could have frozen coffee. We don't know what this person might be involved in. Could be a security risk. 9:18 a.m., Wilson had methodically emptied Nadia's backpack, laptop, tablet, notebooks, a small toiletry bag, all arranged in precise rows on the metal table. Nothing suspicious, nothing prohibited, nothing that aligned with Kelly's confident assessment of fraudulent activity. Do you have any other identification? Wilson asked, his tone neutral, procedural. In my wallet. Nadia nodded toward her bag. Wilson extracted a sleek leather wallet, opening it to reveal a driver's license, credit cards, and what appeared to be several professional credentials. Dr. Nadia Jackson, he read from the license, glancing between the ID and her face. This appears to match the name in the former passport. Kelly leaned forward, examining the license with exaggerated scrutiny. Could also be fake, part of the same fraudulent package. 9:19 a.m. Airport Security Director Andrew Peterson's voice crackled through Ortiz's radio. What's the situation with the passport incident? I'm getting calls. Subject detained, documentation secured, identity verification in process, Ortiz reported efficiently. Keep me updated. This is getting attention upstairs. Peterson replied. Nadia observed the subtle shift in the room's energy, the first indication that this situation was expanding beyond a routine security stop. Martinez checked her phone discreetly, her eyes widening slightly at whatever she saw there. Sir, she addressed Ortiz quietly, showing him her screen. Ortiz's expression remained professional, but a new tension appeared around his eyes. Continue processing, he instructed the team, stepping outside briefly with Martinez. 9:20 a.m. Nadia's government phone buzzed again. The screen displayed Atlantic Airways chairman and a small eagle icon indicating a priority federal contact. I need to take this call, she said firmly. Phone's off during processing. Kelly snapped. There's actually no such requirement at this stage, Wilson corrected reluctantly, his by-the-book nature compelling him to accuracy despite the tension. Nadia reached for her phone, but Kelly stepped forward, placing his hand over it. We're not done here. Officer Kelly, Nadia said, making deliberate eye contact. You have already destroyed federal property. I wouldn't recommend preventing me from communicating with federal authorities as your next action. Something in her tone, not loud, not aggressive, but carrying unmistakable authority, caused Wilson to glance up from his inspection. It was the voice of someone who was accustomed to being heard, to giving directions rather than taking them. The door opened as Ortiz's returned, his demeanor subtly altered. Mr. Peterson is coming down personally, he announced, a note of concern now evident. Good, Kelly nodded. He can authorize the fraud investigation paperwork. Martinez, who had followed Ortiz back in, exchanged a glance with Nadia that contained something approaching an apology. The tension in the room had shifted, no longer simply about a passenger and security officers, but about something larger that was rapidly unfolding beyond these walls. Identity, revelation, preparation. 9:21 a.m., Nadia's government phone buzzed for the 5th time. With deliberate calm, she reached for it despite Kelly's glare. I'm going to take this call now, she stated. Not a request, but a declaration. Something in Nadia's tone made Ortiz step back slightly, creating space. Even Kelly hesitated, his certainty wavering for the first time. This is Dr. Jackson, she answered, her voice shifting into a register of unmistakable authority. The room fell silent as the officers watched this transformation. The woman they'd been processing as a potential security threat suddenly speaking with the clear cadence of executive leadership. Yes, James, Terminal B Security Office. No, I'm fine. Her eyes remained fixed on Kelly as she continued. Exactly as we discussed, the full passenger experience, unfiltered. It's been illuminating. A pause was, "Yes, that would be appropriate now. Thank you." She ended the call and placed the phone deliberately on the table. Screen up, where the Atlantic Airways executive logo was clearly visible. "What was that about?" Kelly demanded, though his tone had lost some of its edge. "That was James Harrington, chairman of the board for Atlantic Airways," Nadia replied evenly. "He's on his way down with the airport director and several members of our executive team." Ortiz's radio crackled urgently. "Supervisor Ortiz, this is Director Peterson. Hold everything. Do not process the female subject from checkpoint B. Repeat. Halt all processing immediately. I'm en route with Atlantic Airways executives." 9:22 a.m. The atmosphere in the room transformed. Wilson stopped his methodical inventory of Nadia's belongings. Martinez stepped fully into the room, no longer hovering at the threshold. Kelly's face showed the first flicker of uncertainty. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice slightly higher than before. "Protocol dictates we wait for the director," Ortiz replied, professionally neutral, but standing straighter now, more formal. Outside the security office, a commotion was building. Through the frosted glass window, the shapes of multiple people approaching became visible. Not the usual movement pattern of security personnel, but the purposeful stride of executives accustomed to command. Nadia gathered her belongings with unhurried precision, restoring order to the items Wilson had arranged on the table. "I believe we'll be continuing this discussion in a different venue," she said calmly, zipping her backpack. "You're still detained until we determine," Kelly began, but Ortiz cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Stand down. Officer Kelly." The door opened to reveal Airport Security Director Andrew Peterson, his face set in a mask of professional concern that barely concealed rising alarm. Behind him stood Airport Director Victoria Reynolds and three individuals in business attire, all wearing Atlantic Airways executive credentials. "Dr. Jackson," Peterson began, his tone dramatically different from the security personnel who had processed her moments before. "On behalf of Newark International Airport, I want to—" He was interrupted by the arrival of more figures in the hallway. TSA Regional Director Marcus Williams, visibly out of breath from his journey across the terminal, and behind him, the distinctive silhouette of Atlantic Airways Board Chairman James Harrington, flanked by what appeared to be legal counsel. The narrow security office could not physically contain this rapidly expanding situation. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The small room designed for intimidating passengers now crowded with aviation leadership, all focused on the woman in the simple hoodie. Nadia stood, collecting her backpack with calm deliberation. "I think we'll need a larger space for this conversation," she observed, as if on cue. Director Reynolds stepped forward. "The executive conference room is prepared. Dr. Jackson." The group began to move toward the exit, forming an impromptu procession through the terminal. Kelly remained frozen, watching as the detainee he had processed just minutes ago was now surrounded by the highest levels of airport leadership. "Officer Kelly," Director Williams said tersely, "you'll join us as well." As they exited the security area, Nadia noticed Maria Rodriguez watching from near the checkpoint, and Emma Fitzgerald still filming discreetly from a seating area. The young student's eyes widened as she recognized the formal escort now surrounding the woman whose passport had been destroyed just minutes earlier. Nadia made brief eye contact with Emma and gave her the slightest nod of acknowledgement, a subtle recognition of the documentation that would soon become evidence in a transformation much larger than one morning's confrontation. The power shift at 23 a.m. The executive conference room on the airport's administrative level existed in stark contrast to the security office. Spacious, well-appointed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. Atlantic Airways jets were visible in their gates, the company logo prominently displayed on their tails. The assembled group filed in with the awkward choreography of an unplanned gathering. Airport Director Victoria Reynolds, a 52-year-old veteran of aviation management, positioned herself at the head of the table by instinct, then hesitated, suddenly uncertain about protocol. Chairman Harrington resolved the question by guiding Nadia to the central position. "Dr. Jackson, I believe this meeting is about your experience today." Officer Kelly entered last, immediately registering the dramatic shift in setting from the sterile security office where he controlled the environment to this corporate space where he was clearly the lowest-ranking person present. His uniform, normally a source of authority, now marked him as isolated. Would someone explain what's happening? He asked, his voice betraying confusion. Chairman Harrington, a distinguished 63-year-old with the gravitas of someone who had navigated aviation's most turbulent decades, turned to address the room. For those who haven't been briefed, Dr. Nadia Jackson was recently appointed Chief Executive Officer of Atlantic Airways. Today is her first day experiencing our operations from the passenger perspective, prior to her public introduction to the company next week. The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Director Peterson's complexion paled noticeably. TSA Regional Director Williams closed his eyes briefly, as if absorbing a physical blow. Officer Kelly's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. Nadia placed her government credentials on the polished conference table. Beside them, she carefully positioned the clear evidence bag containing fragments of her destroyed passport. The juxtaposition was stark, her executive ID intact beside the shredded federal document. Approximately 16 minutes ago, she began, her voice measured and clinical. Officer Kelly determined that my valid U.S. passport was fraudulent. When I attempted to confirm its authenticity, he responded by physically destroying the document in front of dozens of witnesses. She touched the evidence bag gently. This federal passport was issued to me by the State Department 3 years ago. It contains valid visas for 17 countries and has been recognized by immigration authorities around the world. Until today, its validity had never been questioned. The room remained utterly silent. Officer Kelly, TSA Director Williams turned to address him directly. Did you destroy this passport? Kelly's earlier confidence had evaporated entirely. I believed it was fraudulent based on yes or no. Officer, did you destroy this federal document? Yes, sir, but I followed protocol for there is no protocol that authorizes destruction of identification documents. Williams interrupted, his tone ice cold. Confiscation? Yes. Documentation? Yes. Destruction? Never. Airport Director Reynolds leaned forward. Dr. Jackson, on behalf of Newark International Airport, I want to extend our most sincere apologies. This incident represents a catastrophic failure of our security protocols, training, and oversight. Nadia nodded acknowledgement but maintained her focus on the larger issue. This incident isn't about me, Director Reynolds. It's about a system that enabled this officer to destroy a valid passport with impunity, believing there would be no consequences. Chairman Harrington cleared his throat. The company jet is being prepared. We can have you in Los Angeles by early afternoon with replacement documentation already arranged. That won't be necessary, James, Nadia replied. I'll be staying in Newark. We have more important work to do right here. She opened her laptop, typing briefly before turning the screen toward the group. The viral video of her passport being destroyed was playing, the view counter now exceeding 350,000 and climbing rapidly. This incident has already been documented by multiple passengers. It's trending on 3 social platforms. News vans are arriving at the terminal as we speak. Her tone remained remarkably even. We have a choice to make about how we respond. Director Peterson shifted uncomfortably. Our legal team can prepare a settlement agreement immediately. We understand the sensitivity. I'm not interested in a settlement. Director, Nadia interrupted. I'm interested in transformation. She stood assuming the natural authority she typically wielded in corporate settings. The hoodie and sweatpants did nothing to diminish her executive presence. What happened today is a symptom of a systemic failure, not just one officer's misconduct. The real question is how we transform this moment into meaningful change for every passenger who travels through this airport. Officer Kelly, watching his 22-year career disintegrating before his eyes, finally found his voice. Dr. Jackson, I had no idea who you were. If I had known, that's precisely the problem. Officer Kelly. Nadia turned to face him directly. The way you treated me shouldn't depend on my title or position. Every traveler deserves the same dignity, regardless of who they are or what you assume about them based on their appearance. The significance of this moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. What had begun as a routine security confrontation had transformed, in exactly 10 minutes, into a pivotal reckoning for airport security culture. The executive who had been treated as a suspect was now controlling the conversation about what happened next. Chairman Harrington studied Nadia with newfound appreciation. He had hired her for her brilliance in systems transformation, never anticipating that her first executive act would be catalyzed by discrimination she experienced personally. "What do you propose, Dr. Jackson?" he asked. Nadia looked out at the Atlantic Airways planes visible on the tarmac, then back to the assembled leadership. "I believe it's time for a fundamental reimagining of how security and dignity can coexist. And I intend to ensure that what happened to me this morning becomes the catalyst for change that benefits every passenger who passes through these checkpoints." The conference room fell silent. The balance of power now irrevocably shifted. At 9:31 a.m., exactly 24 minutes after Officer Celie had torn her passport, Dr. Nadia Jackson began outlining a vision that would ultimately transform airport security, not just at Newark, but across the global aviation industry. Immediate aftermath, 9:30 a.m., the executive conference room had transformed into a crisis management center. Legal counsel for both Atlantic Airways and the Airport Authority had arrived, along with Department of Transportation investigator Sandra Hayes, a 47-year-old veteran of transportation oversight who had been coincidentally visiting another terminal when alerted about the incident. "Let's be clear about what we're dealing with," Hayes stated, reviewing notes on her tablet. "Destruction of a federal passport, potential civil rights violations, and a security incident that's already being viewed by hundreds of thousands of people online." Airport Director Reynolds nodded grimly. "Our priority should be immediate damage control. We need to issue a statement, suspend the officer pending investigation, and reach an accommodation with Dr. Jackson." "With respect, Director Reynolds," Nadia interjected, "I believe our priority should be the systemic change, not damage control." The room's attention shifted to her. Despite being dressed for anonymous travel rather than executive leadership, Nadia had assumed natural command of the discussion. This incident represents a perfect case study in how security protocols have prioritized power over effectiveness, intimidation over actual safety. She gestured to the evidence bag containing her destroyed passport. "Officer Celie didn't destroy my passport because it presented a security threat. He destroyed it because he could, because the system empowered him to exercise arbitrary authority without accountability." TSA Regional Director Williams shifted uncomfortably. "Dr. Jackson, while I don't condone Officer Kelly's actions, our protocols are designed to maintain security in an environment with very real threats. I understand the security imperative better than most." "Director Williams," Nadia replied, "my doctoral research at MIT focused specifically on human systems under pressure. The current TSA model fails not because it's too security-focused, but because it's built on a fundamentally flawed understanding of human behavior and risk assessment." Chairman Harrington watched this exchange with growing appreciation for his new CEO's approach, measured, evidence-based, and focused on transformation rather than retribution. 9:35 a.m., Officer Celie had been moved to a separate room where he was providing a formal statement to TSA investigators. His union representative had arrived, but the situation offered limited defense options given the viral video evidence and multiple witnesses. "We should discuss compensation," the airport's legal counsel suggested. "Given the circumstances, a confidential settlement would be appropriate." "I'm not interested in financial compensation," Nadia stated firmly, "but I am proposing 3 non-negotiable conditions for my cooperation in resolving this matter quietly." She opened her laptop, displaying a document she had somehow managed to draft amidst the unfolding crisis. "First, I want comprehensive access to security operations data across all terminals, passenger processing times, complaint statistics, secondary screening demographics, incident reports, everything." Airport Director Reynolds looked alarmed. "That information is sensitive from both security and liability perspectives. It's also essential for meaningful reform," Nadia countered. "You can't transform what you can't measure." "Second, she continued, I want to establish a joint task force between Atlantic Airways and airport security to develop new protocols that maintain security effectiveness while prioritizing passenger dignity. I'll lead this personally." TSA Director Williams frowned. "Security protocols are developed at the federal level. Dr. Jackson, it's not as simple as, which brings me to my third condition." Nadia interrupted smoothly. "I want a direct channel to TSA headquarters for pilot program authorization. Newark will become the test site for a new approach to aviation security, one that treats passengers as partners rather than potential threats." 9:40 a.m., The room had fallen silent. Executives and officials processing the scope of what Nadia was proposing. This wasn't a negotiation for personal redress, but a comprehensive platform for systemic transformation. "You're leveraging a personal incident to force institutional change," observed DOT investigator Hayes, her tone suggesting grudging admiration. "I'm responding to a systemic failure with a systemic solution," Nadia corrected. "What happened to me this morning happens to countless travelers every day, most without the platform or power to drive change. I intend to use my position to ensure it stops happening altogether." Chairman Harrington leaned forward. "I hired Dr. Jackson specifically for her ability to transform complex systems. What she's proposing aligns perfectly with Atlantic Airways' need for a modernized approach to customer experience." Airport Director Reynolds still looked uncomfortable. "These changes would require significant resources and federal approvals." "Consider the alternative," Nadia replied evenly. "The video of my passport being destroyed has already been viewed over 500,000 times. News organizations are setting up in the terminal. Without a substantive response that goes beyond one officer's suspension, you're facing a public relations catastrophe and potentially extensive litigation." 9:45 a.m. The mood in the room had shifted from crisis management to serious consideration of Nadia's proposal. Even the most reluctant officials recognized that traditional damage control approaches would be insufficient given the rapidly spreading documentation of the incident. "If we pursue this course," TSA Director Williams said carefully, "we would need assurances about security integrity throughout the transition process." "Absolutely," Nadia nodded. "Security effectiveness remains paramount. My hypothesis is that dignity and security aren't competing priorities, but complementary ones. Treating passengers with respect actually enhances security outcomes by reducing staff cognitive load and increasing meaningful cooperation." DOT investigator Hayes studied Nadia thoughtfully. "You've given this considerable thought for someone who experienced passport destruction less than an hour ago." "I've spent my career studying how systems fail and how they can be transformed," Nadia replied. "What happened this morning wasn't just an incident. It was a perfect illustration of the current system's fundamental flaws. And sometimes, transformation requires a catalyst." As the discussion continued, a clear direction began to emerge. What had begun as a routine security confrontation was evolving into something far more significant, the beginning of a comprehensive reimagining of how security and dignity could coexist in modern air travel. By 9:45 a.m., just 38 minutes after Officer Kelly had destroyed her passport, Nadia Jackson had successfully redirected a personal humiliation into the foundation for institutional change that would ultimately affect millions of travelers worldwide. Part 3, the transformation. 10 o'clock a.m. The evidence collection process began with methodical precision. Department of Transportation investigator Sandra Hayes established a secure digital repository where all documentation related to the incident would be centralized and preserved. "We need to approach this with forensic thoroughness," she instructed the assembled team in the airport's Security Operations Center. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about establishing a pattern of practices that either enabled or failed to prevent this situation." Nadia had changed from her travel clothes into a business suit brought by her assistant, her external transformation from anonymous passenger to corporate executive now complete. She worked alongside Hayes, bringing her systems engineering expertise to the documentation process. "The evidence falls into 5 distinct categories," Nadia explained. "Creating a digital organization system on the main display screen, direct incident evidence, historical pattern, documentation, witness accounts, procedural analysis, outcome, documentation." The team began with securing all surveillance footage. The airport's camera system had captured the passport destruction from 3 different angles. The footage was downloaded and secured before the standard 24-hour deletion cycle could erase it. "I want timestamps synchronized across all systems," Hayes directed. "We need perfect continuity in the evidence chain." 10:30 a.m., Emma Fitzgerald arrived at the operations center, escorted by airport personnel. The journalism student looked overwhelmed but determined as she met Nadia face to face. "Your video documentation was crucial," Nadia told her. "Would you be willing to provide your original footage as official evidence?" "Absolutely," Emma nodded. "That's why I started recording. Something felt wrong about how he was treating you." Emma's phone was connected to the secure system, her unedited video transferred with proper chain of custody documentation. The footage provided what security cameras couldn't: clear audio of the interaction and close-up detail of the passport destruction. "We've identified 12 additional witnesses," reported one of Hayes' team members. 7 have already posted content online, and 5 have contacted the airport directly to provide statements. 11:00 a.m. The investigation expanded to historical documentation. Personnel records revealed that Officer Celie had been the subject of 27 formal complaints over his career, significantly above average for officers of similar tenure. "Look at the pattern," Nadia pointed out, analyzing the data. Complaints spiked particularly with female travelers of color, passengers with limited English proficiency, and anyone questioning his authority. TSA Regional Director Williams reviewed the complaint history with visible discomfort. Some of these were investigated, but many were dismissed as unsubstantiated, because the burden of proof fell entirely on travelers who had no access to documentation. Nadia noted, "The system was designed to make accountability nearly impossible." 11:30 a.m. The team secured Officer Celie's body camera footage, a relatively new requirement that had been implemented unevenly across security personnel. The footage confirmed what other evidence had already established: there had been no legitimate security concern, only an exercise of arbitrary authority. Airport security logs were officially annotated with comprehensive incident details. Every document, video, statement, and record was cataloged in the secure repository with meticulous attention to detail. "This is how institutional memory is properly established," Hayes observed. "Most incidents like this disappear because evidence is never properly preserved." Nadia nodded agreement. "Documentation is the foundation of accountability. You can't change what you can't prove happened." 12:00 p.m. By noon, the evidence collection phase had assembled a comprehensive record of both the specific incident and the system that had enabled it. The documentation painted a clear picture. Officer Celie's actions weren't an aberration, but a predictable outcome of a security culture that prioritized compliance through intimidation rather than cooperation through respect. "What we've established here," Nadia told the assembled team, "is not just evidence for potential disciplinary action against one officer. We've documented the anatomy of a systemic failure, one that affects thousands of passengers every day." The evidence repository had grown to include synchronized video from multiple angles and sources, 23 witness statements, complete personnel records for all involved officers, historical complaint data with demographic analysis, procedural manuals showing gaps in accountability mechanisms, real-time social media response documenting public reaction. This level of documentation is unprecedented for a security incident. Hayes acknowledged, "Most travelers experiencing mistreatment never get access to this kind of evidence, which is precisely why the system remains unchanged." Nadia replied, "Without documentation, there's no catalyst for transformation." As the team completed this phase, the evidence they had collected would become the foundation for what would eventually be known as the Jackson Protocol, a comprehensive reimagining of how security and dignity could coexist in aviation. But first, they would need to manage the immediate media firestorm that was building outside the airport's walls. Initial media response. The afternoon sun beat down on the impromptu press gathering outside Newark Terminal B's main entrance. By 1:00 p.m., news vans from 5 local stations had established position, their satellite dishes raised like metallic flowers turning toward the same invisible signal. Social media had transformed a security incident into a national conversation about power, race, and accountability in public spaces. Inside the terminal's press room, Airport Director Victoria Reynolds stood at a podium flanked by TSA Regional Director Williams and Atlantic Airways Chairman Harrington. The atmosphere crackled with tension as journalists settled into their seats, many already glancing at viral footage playing on their phones. "We've called this briefing to address an incident that occurred this morning at a security checkpoint in Terminal B," Director Reynolds began, her voice steady despite visible strain. "A passenger's passport was inappropriately destroyed by a TSA officer during routine screening." Cameras clicked rhythmically as she continued. "The officer involved has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. We are cooperating fully with the Department of Transportation, which has launched an immediate review." A reporter from the Newark Star-Ledger raised his hand immediately. "Director Reynolds, the passenger involved has been identified as Dr. Nadia Jackson, the newly appointed CEO of Atlantic Airways. Can you confirm this information? Chairman Harrington stepped forward. Yes, Dr. Jackson was experiencing our passenger processes firsthand as part of her onboarding when this unfortunate incident occurred. Unfortunate incident called out a CNN correspondent. The video shows a federal officer deliberately destroying a valid passport. That's destruction of government property, possibly a civil rights violation. Director Williams adjusted his microphone. The TSA does not condone the destruction of any legitimate travel document. This action was not in accordance with our protocols or training. The questions came rapid fire after that. Will criminal charges be filed against the officer? Does TSA acknowledge a pattern of racial profiling at Newark? Where is Dr. Jackson now? Will she be making a statement? Has the White House been briefed on this situation? In Washington, the incident had indeed reached the highest levels of government. The Secretary of Transportation had requested an immediate briefing. The White House press secretary fielded questions during the afternoon briefing. The president is aware of the incident at Newark International and has directed the Department of Transportation to conduct a thorough investigation. He believes that all Americans deserve to be treated with dignity and respect when traveling through our nation's transportation systems. By 3:00 p.m., the video had been viewed over 2.7 million times across platforms. Aviation forums buzzed with industry professionals debating the technical and legal aspects of passport handling. Civil rights organizations issued statements calling for broader examination of screening practices. Inside Atlantic Airways headquarters, the communications team worked feverishly to craft a response that would align with Nadia's vision for transformation rather than simply damage control. At 4:30 p.m., a joint statement was released from Atlantic Airways and Newark International Airport. This morning's incident at Newark Terminal B revealed significant opportunities for improvement in our security processes. Rather than treating this as an isolated event, we are launching a comprehensive review of how security and passenger dignity can better coexist in our aviation system. Dr. Nadia Jackson, CEO of Atlantic Airways, will be personally leading a joint task force to develop new protocols that maintain security effectiveness while ensuring respectful treatment for all travelers. This initiative has received preliminary support from federal transportation authorities. We recognize that today's incident reflects broader systemic issues that require thoughtful, substantive solutions. We are committed to transforming this challenging moment into meaningful progress for all who travel through our facilities. The statement represented a dramatic departure from standard crisis management playbooks. Rather than minimizing the incident or focusing solely on the individual officer, it acknowledged systemic problems and committed to fundamental change. By evening, the story had evolved from a viral video of misconduct to a potential turning point in aviation security culture. News analysts debated the significance. What makes this different is the power dynamic, noted a transportation expert on MSNBC. When discrimination targets someone with institutional authority to drive change, the outcome can be transformative rather than just compensatory. As the day concluded, Dr. Nadia Jackson had not appeared publicly, focusing instead on the substantive work of building a framework for change. But her presence was felt throughout the national conversation that her morning experience had ignited. The initial media cycle had set the stage for what would come next, not just a news story that would fade in days, but the beginning of a sustained effort to reimagine how security and dignity could coexist in public spaces. The Jackson Protocol conception. The night following the passport incident, Nadia worked through until dawn. The Atlantic Airways corporate apartment overlooking the Hudson River had been transformed into an impromptu war room. Whiteboards covered in flowcharts, system diagrams taped to windows, research papers spread across every surface. The fundamental problem, Nadia explained to Sandra Hayes and a small team of security experts gathered in the living room at 2:00 a.m., is that we've designed a system that optimizes for compliance through fear rather than cooperation through respect. On the main whiteboard, she had sketched a diagram showing traditional security flow versus her proposed alternative. The contrast was striking. One showed linear processing focused on control points. The other displayed circular engagement centered on cooperative security. Most security protocols evolved as reactions to threats, contributed Dr. Michael Reeves, a behavioral psychologist specializing in security environments. They were never holistically designed with human dignity as a core parameter. Exactly, Nadia agreed. And that creates a crucial blind spot. When security officers are trained to view passengers primarily as potential threats requiring control, they develop cognitive filters that actually reduce their effectiveness in identifying genuine risks. By sunrise, the team had established 5 core principles that would form the foundation of what was already being called the Jackson Protocol. Protection without humiliation, verification without suspicion, authority with accountability, compliance through clarity, not fear transparency as security enhancement. This isn't just about making security more pleasant, Nadia emphasized to the bleary-eyed team as morning light streamed into the apartment. It's about making it more effective by aligning human psychology with security objectives. The next day, the initial concept faced its first major test when presented to a larger group of traditional security personnel. The conference room at Newark Airport's administration building held an uneasy mixture of TSA officials, airport security, and Atlantic Airways representatives. With all due respect, Dr. Jackson, began one veteran TSA trainer, security isn't supposed to be comfortable. The discomfort itself is a deterrent to those with malicious intent. Nadia had anticipated this response. That's a common assumption, but the evidence doesn't support it. She displayed research data on the main screen. Studies of actual security breaches show that determined adversaries plan for standard intimidation tactics. What they don't anticipate is engaged, observant security that functions differently than expected. TSA Regional Director Williams remained skeptical. These principles sound admirable, but we have mandated protocols established at the federal level. We can't simply reinvent them at one airport. We're not asking to abandon security, Nadia clarified. We're proposing to enhance it by reimagining how it's implemented, and we're requesting authorization for a limited pilot program to demonstrate effectiveness. The discussion continued for hours. Eventually reaching a tentative consensus, a small-scale test implementation would be developed for one security lane at Terminal B, with comprehensive data collection to measure both security effectiveness and passenger experience. Over the following weeks, the concept evolved from theoretical framework to practical implementation plan. Technical teams worked on modified screening configurations. Training specialists developed new approaches for security personnel. Data scientists created measurement protocols to evaluate outcomes. At the center of it all, Nadia maintained unwavering focus on the transformation potential. What happened to me was a catalyst, she told her team during a late-night session 1 month after the incident. But this isn't about one passport or one officer. It's about fundamentally reimagining the relationship between security systems and the humans they're designed to protect. The Jackson Protocol took shape as a comprehensive reimagining of aviation security, not abandoning necessary protections, but enhancing them by aligning security objectives with human dignity. Its development represented a rare opportunity using a personal experience of discrimination as the foundation for systemic change that would ultimately affect millions of travelers. As the implementation plan neared completion, Nadia prepared for her most significant challenge, yet presenting the concept to congressional leaders who controlled the federal transportation security apparatus. The protocol's future and its potential to transform airport experiences nationwide would depend on her ability to convince policymakers that dignity and security were complementary rather than competing priorities. Congressional hearing 1 week after the incident. The marble corridors of the Rayburn House Office Building echoed with unusual activity for an otherwise routine Wednesday. The House Transportation Committee had convened a special hearing titled Aviation Security Protocols Effectiveness, Accountability, and Civil Rights. Inside the wood-paneled hearing room, television cameras positioned for optimal angles captured a scene charged with anticipation. Committee members arranged themselves behind the elevated dais, while staffers whispered last-minute briefings to their representatives. At the witness table, Nadia sat poised in a navy blue suit, documents meticulously arranged before her. To her right sat TSA Administrator Philip Garza, whose agency faced difficult questions about training and oversight. To her left, Department of Transportation Investigator Sandra Hayes, whose preliminary findings had accelerated the congressional response. Committee Chairman Congressman Robert Thornton gavelled the session to order at precisely 10 o'clock a.m. This committee convenes today to examine a disturbing incident that has raised serious questions about our aviation security practices and their impact on the civil liberties of American travelers. The opening statements proceeded predictably. Expressions of concern, commitments to security, assurances of thorough investigation. Then the video evidence was played for the official record. The room fell silent as Officer Kelly's actions unfolded on the large display screens. His deliberate destruction of Nadia's passport now documented in the congressional record. When Nadia was finally called to testify, she rose and faced the committee with composed determination. Chairman Thornton, Ranking Member Davis, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to address you today. While I appear before you because of what happened to me personally, I'm here to speak about something much larger than one incident or one passport. Her voice remained steady as she continued. What you witnessed in that video isn't an aberration. It's the predictable outcome of a security system designed to prioritize compliance through intimidation rather than cooperation through respect. For the next 12 minutes, Nadia laid out a comprehensive analysis of current security protocols, their psychological impacts, and their operational limitations. She wasn't speaking as a victim seeking redress, but as a systems expert diagnosing fundamental flaws. The officer who destroyed my passport wasn't deviating from his training, she explained. He was demonstrating its logical conclusion, a belief that security requires dominance rather than partnership with the traveling public. Representative Sarah Morgan leaned forward. Dr. Jackson, are you suggesting we should compromise security protocols for the sake of passenger comfort? Quite the opposite, Congresswoman. Nadia replied, I'm suggesting we enhance security effectiveness by aligning it with human dignity. The evidence shows that security personnel operating in environments of mutual respect detect actual threats more accurately because their cognitive resources aren't consumed by unnecessary confrontation. She displayed data from international aviation security programs that had implemented similar philosophies. When Amsterdam Schiphol Airport shifted to a dignity-focused approach, threat detection improved by 34%, while passenger complaints decreased by 57%. The questioning continued for nearly 2 hours, probing every aspect of both the specific incident and Nadia's proposed alternatives. Throughout, she maintained an evidence-based, solutions-oriented approach that transcended partisan divisions on the committee. What exactly are you proposing? Asked Representative Michael Ortega. I'm proposing the authorization of a pilot program at Newark International Airport to implement and test what we're calling the Jackson Protocol, a comprehensive reimagining of how security and dignity can coexist without compromising either. Nadia outlined the 5 core principles and their practical applications, explaining how they would transform passenger experiences while enhancing security outcomes. The committee's attention remained fixed as she described a system that seemed obvious in retrospect, but revolutionary in the current context. When TSA Administrator Garza was questioned about his agency's response, he struck a notably collaborative tone. While we maintain that Officer Kelly's actions were not consistent with our training, we acknowledge Dr. Jackson's expertise in systems design. We are cautiously supportive of a limited pilot program to test these concepts under controlled conditions. As the hearing concluded, something remarkable had occurred. What began as an oversight investigation into misconduct had transformed into bipartisan support for innovation. Committee members from both parties expressed interest in the pilot program's potential. Chairman Thornton summarized the shift. It appears that what began as a troubling incident may lead to meaningful improvement in how we approach aviation security. This committee will work with the Department of Transportation to facilitate the necessary authorizations for this pilot program, with appropriate oversight and evaluation metrics. As Nadia exited the hearing room, surrounded by reporters seeking comments, she maintained her focus on the transformation ahead rather than the incident behind. Today was an important step toward reimagining security in a way that respects the dignity of every traveler while enhancing our collective safety. The congressional hearing had accomplished what seemed impossible just 1 week earlier, transforming a viral video of discrimination into formal authorization for systematic change. The Jackson Protocol had secured its first major institutional endorsement, setting the stage for implementation that would begin to reshape airport experiences nationwide. Implementation challenges. 1 month after the congressional hearing, the reality of transforming theory into practice became increasingly apparent. Terminal B's Security Lane 7 had been designated as the Jackson Protocol Pilot Zone, but its implementation faced resistance at every level. This isn't going to work in the real world, muttered Senior TSA Officer Gerald Matthews, a 15-year veteran, during the 3rd training session. You can't process passengers efficiently if you're busy having conversation circles and respect ceremonies. Nadia, who insisted on personally leading many of the training modules, addressed the resistance directly. Officer Matthews, I understand your skepticism. Change is difficult, especially when it challenges practices you've relied on for years. She displayed processing statistics on the training room screen, but the data shows that respectful engagement actually increases efficiency. When passengers understand exactly what's expected and why, compliance improves dramatically. The technical challenges proved equally daunting. Existing equipment had been designed for linear processing rather than the circular engagement model Nadia proposed. Engineers worked around the clock to reconfigure scanning stations, redesign queuing systems, and develop new signage that emphasized clarity over intimidation. Budget constraints threatened to derail progress entirely. The pilot program had received authorization but minimal funding, requiring creative resource allocation. We can't afford to replace the millimeter wave scanners, reported Technical Director Paul Ramirez during an implementation meeting. Then we'll reposition the existing ones. Nadia decided, the issue isn't the technology itself, but how we integrate it into a respectful passenger journey. The most significant resistance came from mid-level management, those most invested in the status quo. TSA Shift Supervisor Diane Roberts voiced the concern of many. If we admit the current system needs this kind of overhaul, aren't we acknowledging that we've been doing it wrong all this time? Sandra Hayes, who had remained involved as the DOT liaison, addressed this concern head-on. This isn't about assigning blame for past practices. It's about evolving our approach based on new understanding of how security and dignity can work together. 2 months into the implementation process, a breakthrough finally occurred during a simulation exercise. 20 volunteers moved through the redesigned security lane, which featured clear, respectful signage, explaining each step of the process. Circular design allowing passengers to maintain visual contact with their belongings. Officers trained in respectful engagement rather than intimidation. Tactics, real-time feedback mechanisms for both security staff and passengers. Transparent documentation of all enhanced screening decisions. The results were immediately apparent. Processing times decreased by 22%. Passenger satisfaction ratings increased by 47%. Most importantly, security effectiveness, measured by planted test items, improved by 34%. Officer Matthews, who had been among the most vocal skeptics, approached Nadia after reviewing the simulation data. I've been doing this job for 15 years, he admitted. Today was the first time I felt like I was actually enhancing security rather than just processing bodies. The pilot implementation faced its first major test when actual passengers began experiencing the new protocol. On a busy Friday morning, Lane 7 opened to the public with comprehensive data collection systems in place to measure every aspect of the experience. Nadia stood nearby, observing as travelers encountered the transformed security approach. An elderly couple expressed visible relief at the clear guidance. A harried mother with 3 children moved through with significantly less stress. A businessman initially suspicious of the new process became visibly impressed by its efficiency. By the end of the first week, the data told a compelling story. Average processing time decreased 18%. Passenger complaints decreased 64%. Secondary screening accuracy increased 29%. Officer job satisfaction increased 41%. People respond to being treated with dignity. Nadia explained to a group of visiting security officials from other airports. When we design systems that respect humanity rather than suppress it, everyone benefits, passengers and security personnel alike. 3 months after the initial incident, what had begun as a concept born from personal humiliation had evolved into a functioning reality. The Jackson Protocol wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was demonstrating measurable improvements in both security effectiveness and human experience. As the pilot program expanded to additional security lanes, even the most skeptical observers began to acknowledge its success. The transformation wasn't complete, but it had achieved critical momentum, enough to ensure that the changes initiated would continue to evolve and spread. For Nadia, watching travelers move through security with their dignity intact represented the most meaningful response to what had happened to her that Tuesday morning. Not punishment for one officer, but transformation for an entire system. Kelly's redemption arc, 14 months after the passport incident. Richard Kelly sat alone in a small coffee shop 3 miles from Newark Airport. His TSA uniform was long gone, replaced by casual clothes that somehow made him look smaller, less certain. The coffee before him had grown cold, untouched as he rehearsed what he would say when, if she arrived. The door opened, and Dr. Nadia Jackson entered. Despite her now familiar face appearing regularly in transportation industry publications, few in the cafe recognized her. She spotted Kelly immediately and walked directly to his table. "Mr. Kelly," she greeted him with professional courtesy, neither warm nor cold. "Dr. Jackson," he replied, standing awkwardly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me." They sat in momentary silence, the weight of their history creating an invisible barrier between them. Outside, planes from Newark traced white lines across the autumn sky. "I didn't expect you to accept my request," Kelly finally said, unable to fully meet her eyes. "The Jackson Protocol isn't just about systems," Nadia replied. "It's about transformation. You requested this meeting through the accountability program. I'm listening." The months after his termination had been the darkest of Kelly's life. At first, he drowned in bitterness, blaming everyone but himself. The woke mob, the airline, the media, even Nadia herself. He'd spent nights scrolling through social media comments about the incident, fueling his resentment with each click. "After I lost my job, I was angry," he admitted, his voice softer than the confrontational bark Nadia remembered. "I kept telling myself I was just doing my job, that if you hadn't been who you were, nobody would have cared." He stared down at his untouched coffee. "Then my daughter called me. First time in 3 years. She said she'd seen the video, and it reminded her of how I'd always made her feel small, wrong, constantly judged. She said watching me tear up your passport brought back every holiday dinner I'd ruined, every achievement I'd dismissed." Kelly's hands trembled slightly. "That's when I realized this wasn't about protocols or procedures. It was about who I'd become. Someone who needed to make others feel powerless just to feel something myself." The mandatory bias training program had initially felt like punishment, something to endure rather than embrace. But slowly, session by session, something had begun to crack open inside him. Recognition of patterns he'd never acknowledged, behaviors he'd justified through a distorted lens of security necessity. "I've been thinking about power," he continued, "for 22 years. The only power I thought I had was the power to make people feel small. I never realized that real power comes from lifting people up, not pushing them down." Nadia completed his sentence. He nodded, then pushed a folder across the table. Inside was his new community program proposal, training former security officers to become passenger advocates for elderly and disabled travelers. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but maybe I can help build something better." Nadia reviewed the proposal thoughtfully. The man before her wasn't seeking forgiveness exactly, but something perhaps more meaningful, the opportunity to transform his own experience into positive change. "Your perspective is valuable precisely because you understand the mindset that needs to change," she observed. "You lived it, you perpetuated it, and now you see it differently." She returned the folder with several notes added to the margins, suggestions for implementation, potential funding sources, metrics for measuring impact. Atlantic Airways has a community grant program for initiatives that enhance the travel experience for vulnerable populations. She told him, "Submit your proposal through proper channels. If it meets the criteria, it will be evaluated on its merits." It wasn't forgiveness she was offering, but something more valuable, the chance to be part of the solution rather than just a symbol of the problem. As they prepared to leave, Kelly gathered his courage to ask the question that had haunted him for months. "Do you think people can really change, Dr. Jackson? Or am I just fooling myself?" Nadia considered the question carefully. "I believe systems can change. That's the foundation of my work. And systems are made of people making different choices than they made before." She met his gaze directly. "The real question isn't whether change is possible, but whether you're willing to do the work it requires, day after day, even when it's difficult." 6 months later, Richard Kelly's passenger advocacy program received its first grant funding. The man who had once destroyed a passport out of misplaced authority now trained former security personnel to guide vulnerable travelers through airports with patience and respect. His transformation wasn't perfect or complete. Change never is. But his journey from symbol of a broken system to advocate for a better one embodied the core principle that Nadia had built into the Jackson Protocol. Dignity isn't just something we owe to others. It's something that transforms us when we extend it. Global expansion. 3 years after the passport incident, the Jackson Protocol had expanded far beyond its origins at Newark Terminal B. What began as a localized response to discrimination had evolved into a global movement, reimagining the relationship between security and human dignity. Amsterdam Schiphol Airport had been the first international adopter, implementing the protocol across all terminals after sending a delegation to observe the Newark pilot program. The results exceeded even optimistic projections. Passenger satisfaction increased by 61%, while security effectiveness, measured by test item detection rates, improved by a remarkable 43%. The Jackson approach demonstrates that security and passenger experience aren't competing priorities but complementary ones, noted Schiphol's security director during an aviation conference in Singapore. When we designed our systems to respect dignity while maintaining vigilance, both metrics improved dramatically. Hong Kong International and Sydney's Kingsford Smith followed soon after, each adapting the core principles to their specific cultural and operational contexts. The distinctive blue certification emblem, a passport icon within a protective circle, became recognized worldwide as a symbol of security with dignity. At Tokyo Haneda Airport, the protocol underwent particularly thoughtful cultural adaptation. Security personnel were trained to incorporate principles of omotenashi Japanese hospitality into screening procedures, creating an experience that maintains security rigor while honoring cultural values of respect and consideration. The genius of the Jackson Protocol, observed the International Air Transport Association's quarterly review, lies in its adaptability. Rather than imposing rigid procedures, it establishes core principles that can be interpreted through diverse cultural lenses while maintaining security integrity. Statistical evidence from implementing airports told a compelling story. Average processing times decreased 27%, passenger complaints decreased 68%, security incident detection increased 32%, staff retention rates improved 41%, racial disparities in secondary screening, selection reduced from 9-1 to 1-to-1. The United Nations International Civil Aviation Organization formally recognized the Jackson Protocol with its highest Safety Innovation Award, noting that dignity-centered security represents not merely an ethical improvement, but a measurable enhancement to threat detection capabilities worldwide. Perhaps most surprisingly, security agencies initially resistant to the reforms had become its strongest advocates after seeing the operational benefits. Former TSA Administrator Philip Garza, once skeptical of Nadia's approach, now led international training sessions. We were wrong to view respect and security as competing priorities, Garza acknowledged at the Global Aviation Summit. The data is undeniable. Treating people with dignity makes us all safer. The transformation extended beyond customer-facing interactions to reshape the culture of security organizations themselves. Staff who had previously measured their effectiveness by compliance metrics now evaluated their success through both security outcomes and human experience measures. At Newark International, where it all began, Terminal B had become a pilgrimage site for transportation officials worldwide. The security checkpoint where Nadia's passport had been destroyed now featured a small display case containing 2 items, fragments of the torn passport preserved behind glass, and beside it, the official Jackson Protocol handbook and with its distinctive emblem. A simple plaque beneath them read, "From destruction, transformation, from humiliation, dignity, from one moment, lasting change." As Nadia traveled between international implementations, she often reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her here, how a moment of personal humiliation had catalyzed global transformation. The system she had envisioned in those first frantic hours after the incident had evolved beyond her initial conception, enriched by diverse perspectives and adapted to varied cultural contexts. What had begun with a torn passport had become a worldwide movement, reimagining how security and dignity could coexist, not as competing values, but as essential partners in creating systems that honored humanity while protecting it. Part 4, the resolution. 3 years to the day after her passport was torn apart at the security checkpoint, Dr. Nadia Jackson returned to Newark International Airport Terminal B. This time, there was no anonymity. Her face had appeared on the cover of Time magazine's 100 Most Influential People issue, and the Jackson Protocol had become standard terminology in global aviation. But today wasn't about recognition or accolades. It was about witnessing the full circle of transformation that had begun with that moment of humiliation. The terminal itself had physically transformed. Gone were the intimidating barriers and confusing signage of the old security checkpoint. In their place stood a thoughtfully designed space where security and respect coexisted by intention rather than accident. Nadia paused near the entrance, watching the morning flow of travelers. Clear guidance in multiple languages explained each step of the screening process. Security officers engaged with passengers as partners rather than suspects. The atmosphere, once charged with anxiety and confrontation, now reflected focused professionalism and mutual respect. Jessica Martinez, the sympathetic TSA officer who had witnessed Nadia's passport destruction 3 years earlier, had risen to become a training supervisor for the entire terminal. She spotted Nadia and approached with professional warmth. "Dr. Jackson, welcome back to Newark," she greeted her. "We weren't expecting you today." "This wasn't an official item," Nadia explained. "I wanted to experience the transformation as a regular passenger would." Martinez nodded, understanding. "Would you like a tour of the changes since your last quarterly review?" As they walked through the security area, Martinez highlighted the protocol's evolution. "We've implemented the fourth-generation communication system," she explained, indicating the digital guidance displays that adapted to passenger flow patterns. "Real-time feedback has increased compliance rates by 37%, while reducing anxiety metrics significantly." The physical changes were immediately apparent, circular designs allowing passengers to maintain visual contact with their belongings, comfortable seating for those needing assistance with shoes or other items, privacy screens for more sensitive inspections. But the most striking differences were less tangible: the quality of interactions between security personnel and travelers, the absence of unnecessary tension, the maintenance of dignity throughout necessary security procedures. The cultural shift took longest, Martinez admitted as they passed an officer patiently explaining procedures to an elderly couple. Changing equipment and protocols was relatively straightforward. Changing mindsets required persistent reinforcement. Nadia felt a swell of emotion watching a Muslim woman pass through screening with respectful accommodation, a father guiding his children through the process without stress, a traveler with a disability receiving assistance that preserved both safety and dignity. "You know what I'm most proud of," Martinez said, following Nadia's gaze. "The things that don't happen anymore. The humiliations that have been designed out of the system." Near the checkpoint exit stood a small display case. Inside, protected by museum-quality glass, lay fragments of Nadia's torn passport, preserved as both historical artifact and daily reminder. Beside it, the first printed edition of the Jackson Protocol Handbook, its blue cover featuring the now internationally recognized emblem. As Nadia studied the display, she noticed a young black girl, perhaps 13, traveling alone and looking nervous as she approached the document check station. The girl clutched her passport tightly, eyes darting uncertainly between the officers and the signs. Officer Brian Ramirez, who had completed the Jackson Protocol certification program 6 months earlier, noticed the girl's anxiety. He approached with a gentle smile. "First time flying alone?" he asked. The girl nodded, still clutching her passport. "It's okay to be nervous," Ramirez assured her. "I'll walk you through everything step by step." "May I see your travel documents, please?" The girl carefully handed over her passport, still looking apprehensive. Ramirez checked it efficiently but without rushing, explaining each step of the process. "Everything looks perfect," he said, returning the passport with the same care with which it had been given. "Follow the blue line to the screening area, and the officer there will help you with the next steps." The girl visibly relaxed, offering a small smile of gratitude as she followed the indicated path. Nadia, who had paused to observe this interaction, felt a profound sense of completion. This was what security could and should be: thorough but reassuring, professional but human. The contrast with her own experience 3 years ago couldn't have been more stark. Martinez noticed Nadia watching the interaction. "That happens thousands of times every day now," she said quietly. "Most passengers don't even realize how different it is from before." "That's the mark of good systems design," Nadia replied, her voice carrying a hint of emotion. "When it works properly, it feels natural rather than imposed." As they continued through the terminal, Nadia observed countless small interactions that reflected the protocol's implementation. An elderly passenger assisted with dignity, a flustered parent guided through the process with patience. A traveler with limited English provided clear visual instructions. The data tells us we're more secure now, Martinez noted. Threat detection rates have improved 32% since implementation. But the numbers don't capture the human impact. How it feels to travel through this space now compared to before. Nadia nodded. Security isn't just about detecting threats. It's about creating an environment where people can move through the world with both safety and dignity intact. 3 years earlier, she had stood in the same terminal with her identity literally torn apart, experiencing the very system she would ultimately transform. Today, she witnessed the result of that transformation, not just in metrics and procedures, but in the human experience of thousands of travelers passing through this space every day. As she prepared to depart for her next destination, Nadia took one final look at the display case with her torn passport. What had begun as destruction had catalyzed creation. What had started as humiliation had evolved into dignity for countless travelers who would never know her name or story, but who benefited from the transformation her experience had initiated. The true measure of the Jackson Protocol's success wasn't in awards or recognition, but in these ordinary moments where security and dignity coexisted so seamlessly that their previous opposition seemed unimaginable. Measurable impacts. 3 years into implementation, the data supporting the Jackson Protocol's effectiveness had become impossible to ignore. What began as a pilot program at one security lane had expanded to transform aviation security worldwide, with measurable impacts across every significant metric. The quarterly assessment report, prepared by independent evaluators from the International Air Transport Association, quantified the transformation in precise terms. Security effectiveness. Threat detection rates increased 32% across implementing airports. Prohibited item discovery improved 29% in standardized testing. Security incident response times decreased 18%. False alarm rates reduced 41%, allowing more focused attention on genuine concerns. Passenger experience. Complaint rates decreased a 68% compared to pre-implementation baseline. Processing satisfaction scores improved 73% based on exit surveys. Anxiety measurements via voluntary biometric monitoring showed 47% reduction. Accessibility ratings from travelers with disabilities increased 83%. Operational efficiency. Average processing and waiting times decreased 24% despite more thorough screening. Staff retention rates improved 41%, reducing training costs significantly. Workplace injury reports decreased 37% due to improved ergonomics and reduced confrontation. Resource allocation efficiency increased 28% through data-driven deployment. Social impact. Racial disparity in secondary screening and selection reduced from 8 to 1 to 1.3. 1. Gender-based complaint disparities eliminated entirely. Language-based misunderstandings decreased 76%. Religious accommodation, satisfaction increased 88%. Financial outcomes. Implementation costs recovered within 14 months through efficiency gains. Litigation expenses decreased 91% as dignity-related complaints plummeted. Staff turnover costs reduced by $42 million annually across participating airports. Brand value improvements documented by customer loyalty metrics. The most compelling aspect of these results, noted Dr. Eleanor Parker, lead evaluator for the assessment team, is their consistency across diverse cultural and operational contexts. From Newark to Singapore, from Sydney to Amsterdam, the core principles demonstrate universal effectiveness when properly implemented. The security industry, initially resistant to change, had become the protocol's strongest advocate as the operational benefits became increasingly apparent. Annual security conferences now featured dedicated tracks on dignity-centered approaches, with former skeptics presenting case studies on successful implementation. TSA Director Williams, who had approached Nadia's initial proposal with professional caution, now regularly cited the protocol as the most significant advancement in aviation security since the post-9/11 reforms. What the data conclusively demonstrates, he told an international security symposium, is that respect and security aren't competing values but complementary ones. The Jackson Protocol has objectively improved our ability to maintain safe air travel while restoring the dignity of the passenger experience. Beyond the aviation sector, The principles had begun influencing security approaches in other domains. Public venues, government buildings, even healthcare facilities were adapting core elements of the protocol to their specific contexts. The Harvard Business Review published a comprehensive case study analyzing how the transformation had occurred so rapidly across an industry traditionally resistant to change. Their conclusion highlighted the perfect alignment of ethical and practical imperatives. The Jackson Protocol succeeded where previous reform attempts failed because it demonstrated that dignity and security create a virtuous cycle rather than a zero-sum trade-off. By reimagining these values as partners, rather than competitors, implementing organizations discovered that respecting human dignity actually enhances security outcomes through improved cooperation, reduced cognitive load for security personnel, and more effective resource allocation. For Nadia, the metrics provided validation of her initial hypothesis, that systems designed around human dignity wouldn't compromise security but enhance it. The data had transformed what critics initially dismissed as idealistic into what pragmatists now recognized as best practice. As she reviewed the latest quarterly assessment in her office, overlooking Atlantic Airways' operations center, Nadia reflected on the journey from theory to demonstrated reality. What had begun as an intuitive response to her own experience had evolved into evidence-based transformation, affecting millions of travelers daily. The numbers told a story of systematic improvement, but behind each percentage point and statistical trend lay countless human experiences transformed. Travelers moving through security without sacrificing their dignity, officers performing their duties with renewed purpose and respect, a fundamental relationship reshaped between security systems and the people they existed to protect. Personal reflection. The Atlantic Airways executive jet cruised at 38,000 feet, its cabin quiet except for the gentle hum of engines. Nadia sat alone near the window, watching clouds pass beneath like white islands in an endless blue sea. 3 years had passed since her passport was torn apart at Newark. 3 years of relentless work to transforming that moment of humiliation into systematic change. Her thoughts drifted to the beginning of this journey. In the immediate aftermath of the incident, she had experienced the natural human reaction: anger, humiliation, a desire for Officer Kelly to face consequences for his actions. For a brief, private moment in the airport restroom after leaving the executive conference room, she had allowed herself to cry, not from hurt, but from the visceral rage that threatened to consume her. No one had seen those tears, and she'd quickly composed herself, but the memory remained vivid. Systems think in patterns. Her MIT mentor, Dr. Lawrence, had told her during a particularly challenging research project, "When you're personally affected, step back and ask, what pattern am I witnessing? What invisible structures made this moment inevitable?" That Tuesday morning at Newark had been precisely such a moment, a visible manifestation of invisible patterns that affected countless travelers every day. The torn passport became both symbol and catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond one officer or one incident. The cabin phone chimed softly. "Dr. Jackson," her assistant's voice came through. "Maria Rodriguez is waiting as requested when we land." "Thank you, Sarah," Nadia replied. "Please let her know I'm looking forward to our conversation." Maria Rodriguez, the Atlantic Airways flight attendant who had witnessed the original incident, had become an important voice in the protocol implementation. Her perspective from both sides of the security experience, as airline personnel and as a Hispanic woman often subjected to additional screening, had provided invaluable insights during development. As the plane began its descent, Nadia opened her personal journal, something she'd maintained since childhood but rarely shared with anyone. In it, she documented her emotional journey alongside the professional transformation. Month 1. Still feel the sting of humiliation when I recall Kelly's smirk as he tore my passport. Using that feeling as fuel rather than distraction. The system that produced him is the real target, not the man himself. Month 6 implementation challenges. Testing my patience. Easy to design theory. Harder to change entrenched habits. Reminded today why this matters when I witnessed an elderly woman treated with unnecessary harshness at checkpoint. Month 12. The data is beginning to tell the story I always believed was possible. Security and dignity aren't opposing forces, but essential partners. This validation matters more than any personal vindication. Year 3. Sometimes forget how it started, with my own passport being destroyed. The personal has become universal. The transformation belongs to everyone now, which is exactly as it should be. After landing, Nadia met Maria in a quiet corner of the executive lounge. 3 years had transformed their relationship from chance witnesses in a moment of crisis to collaborators in ongoing change. The Stockholm implementation is exceeding expectations, Maria reported, reviewing notes from her recent site visit. They've adapted the core principles beautifully to reflect Scandinavian cultural contexts. And the staff response, Nadia asked. Remarkably positive. Security officers report feeling more professional pride in their work. One supervisor told me, "We're finally doing the job we always thought we were doing, protecting people while respecting them." Nadia nodded thoughtfully. That alignment between purpose and practice seems to be the key to sustainable change. Maria hesitated, then asked the question she'd been considering throughout their 3-year collaboration. When it happened, when Kelly tore your passport, did you know then what would come from it? Did you see all this? Not specifically, Nadia admitted, but I recognized the moment as an opportunity for transformation rather than just retribution. My training taught me to look for leverage points in systems, places where targeted intervention can create cascading change. Most people would have just wanted the officer fired, Maria observed. And nothing would have changed, Nadia replied. Another officer would have taken his place within the same broken system, continuing the same patterns with different faces. They sat in thoughtful silence for a moment, both contemplating how a single incident had catalyzed global transformation. You know what I think about sometimes, Maria said finally? All the people who will never know what flying was like before, who will move through airports without having their dignity violated as a matter of routine procedure, who will never know there was a time when security and respect were considered opposing forces. Nadia smiled. That's the true measure of systems change, when the new reality becomes so natural that the old one seems unimaginable. As they concluded their meeting, Nadia reflected on her journey from anger to action, from personal humiliation to professional purpose. The torn passport had become more than a symbol of discrimination. It had become the catalyst for her most meaningful work, transforming not just aviation security, but her own understanding of how change happens in complex human systems. The greatest validation wasn't in metrics or accolades, but in those ordinary moments she witnessed daily. Travelers moving through security with their dignity intact. Officers performing their duties with respect and purpose. A fundamental relationship reshaped between security systems and the humans they existed to protect. Industry recognition. The Grand Ballroom of the Geneva International Conference Center glowed with understated elegance as the global aviation community gathered for its most prestigious annual event. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with the flags of participating nations. On stage, the distinctive blue emblem of the Global Aviation Security Innovation Award, a stylized aircraft within a protective circle, awaited presentation. Industry leaders, government officials, and security experts from 6 continents had assembled to witness what many considered the formal institutionalization of a revolution in aviation security. The Jackson Protocol had transcended its origins as a response to discrimination to become recognized best practice worldwide. International Air Transport Association Director General Elena Morales approached the podium, her voice carrying through the expectant silence. The aviation industry has faced many challenges in its history: technological, operational, and human. Our responses to these challenges define us as a community committed to safe, accessible global mobility. She gestured toward the assembled audience. Tonight, we recognize a transformation that many considered impossible just 3 years ago. A fundamental reimagining of how security and human dignity can exist not as competing priorities, but as essential partners. Images appeared on the massive screens behind her. Security checkpoints from around the world implementing the protocol. Travelers moving through with both safety and dignity intact. Statistical graphics demonstrating improved outcomes across all metrics. The 28 Global Aviation Security Innovation Award honors not just an improved procedure or technology, but a comprehensive paradigm shift that has enhanced both security effectiveness and the human experience of air travel. Now, former skeptics who had become the protocol's strongest advocates filled the front rows. TSA Administrator Garza, Schiphol Security Director Van der Meer, Sydney Airport's Chief of Operations Wilson, Their presence represented the industry's full embrace of principles that had initially faced significant resistance. Dr. Nadia Jackson, Director Morales continued, transformed a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for systematic change that benefits every traveler, every security officer, and the entire global aviation ecosystem. As Nadia approached the stage to accept the award, the ballroom erupted in standing ovation. The applause represented more than professional courtesy. It acknowledged a transformation that had improved the working lives of security personnel while restoring dignity to the passenger experience. "Thank you," Nadia began, the Crystal Award catching light as she stood at the podium. "This recognition belongs not to me alone, but to the countless individuals who recognize that security without dignity isn't truly secure at all." She acknowledged key collaborators: Sandra Hayes from the Department of Transportation, Maria Rodriguez from Atlantic Airways, the technical teams that had transformed theory into practical implementation, the security officers who had embraced new approaches despite decades of contrary training. 3 years ago, a TSA officer tore my passport apart because the system had trained him to see dominance as security, intimidation as effectiveness. She continued, "Today, that same system trains officers to recognize that respect and vigilance are complementary, not competing values." The screens behind her displayed global implementation data: 82 major airports, 47 countries, over 2.3 billion passenger journeys improved through protocol implementation. "The most powerful validation isn't found in awards or recognition," Nadia said, gesturing to the crystal trophy, "but in those ordinary moments when travelers move through security with both their safety and dignity intact, moments that happen millions of times each day across the global aviation network." TSA Director Williams approached the microphone for the official response. His presence was particularly meaningful given his initial skepticism about Nadia's proposed changes. "On behalf of security agencies worldwide, I acknowledge that we were wrong to view dignity and security as competing priorities," he stated with remarkable candor. "The data is undeniable. Respectful security is more effective security. The Jackson Protocol hasn't just improved the passenger experience, it has measurably enhanced our ability to fulfill our core mission of protecting the traveling public." The industry recognition represented a tipping point, formal acknowledgement that the transformation had become irreversible. What had begun as an isolated pilot program at Newark had evolved into global standard practice, endorsed by the same institutions that had initially resisted change. As the ceremony concluded, aviation leaders from regions not yet implementing the protocol approached Nadia to discuss adoption timelines. The conversation had shifted from whether to implement to how quickly implementation could proceed. Later that evening, at a small gathering of key collaborators, Sandra Hayes raised a toast. "To torn passports and the transformations they inspire," she said, meeting Nadia's eyes with shared understanding of their journey. "To systems that bend toward dignity when properly challenged," Nadia responded, completing the sentiment. The industry recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the real achievement, creating a world where security and respect coexisted so naturally that their previous opposition seemed unimaginable. That transformation, touching millions of lives daily in ways both measurable and profound, represented the true legacy of the torn passport and the response it had inspired. Final scene and symbol, the early morning light filtered through Newark Terminal B's massive windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Nadia stood near the central security checkpoint, observing the daily choreography of travelers and officers navigating the security process with a dignity that had become standard rather than exceptional. 3 years and 7 months had passed since Officer Kelly tore her passport at this very location. The terminal had been physically transformed, redesigned according to Jackson protocol specifications with circular flow patterns, clear guidance, and spaces that prioritize both security and human dignity. But the most profound changes weren't architectural. They lived in the quality of interactions between security personnel and travelers, in the absence of unnecessary tension, in the maintenance of respect throughout necessary security procedures. Nadia watched as a family approached the document verification station, parents guiding 3 young children with a particular blend of determination and chaos unique to traveling with small ones. The security officer greeted them with patient professionalism, explaining each step of the process in terms the children could understand. "Your job is to stay close to your parents and listen carefully," the officer told the wide-eyed 6-year-old, That helps us keep everyone safe. The child nodded solemnly, accepting this framing of security as cooperative rather than confrontational. Near the scanner, an elderly man with a cane received assistance that preserved both his safety and dignity. The officer providing help maintained respectful conversation throughout, treating the passenger as a person rather than a processing challenge. A Muslim woman in hijab passed through without the excessive scrutiny that had once been routine. A businessman with an artificial leg received appropriate accommodation without embarrassment or delay. A nervous first-time flyer received clear guidance that transformed anxiety into understanding. None of these travelers knew they were experiencing the results of transformation catalyzed by a torn passport and the response it inspired. They simply moved through a security system that protected them while respecting them, an experience now so standard that its previous absence seemed unimaginable. Nadia approached the display case that had become both memorial and mission statement. Inside, protected by museum-quality glass, lay fragments of her torn passport, preserved as historical artifact and daily reminder. Beside it, the first printed edition of the Jackson Protocol Handbook, its blue cover featuring the now internationally recognized emblem. The simple plaque beneath them still read, "From destruction, transformation, from humiliation, dignity, from one moment, lasting change." As she studied these artifacts of her journey, Nadia noticed a young black girl, perhaps 12 or 13, stopping to examine the display. The girl read the plaque with focused attention, then looked up at the torn passport fragments with evident curiosity. "What happened to it?" she asked, noticing Nadia standing nearby. "It was torn apart." Nadia replied simply, "On purpose." The girl looked shocked at the possibility. "Yes, by someone who thought destroying it was part of keeping people safe." The girl considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. "That doesn't make sense. How does ripping someone's passport make anybody safer?" "It doesn't," Nadia agreed, and that realization helped change how security works in airports around the world. "For the better?" the girl asked. Nadia smiled. "For the better, security is still important, but now it works with dignity rather than against it." The girl nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and continued toward her gate, unaware she had been speaking with the person whose experience had catalyzed the transformation she now took for granted. Watching her go, Nadia felt a profound sense of completion. The true measure of the Jackson Protocol's success wasn't in awards or recognition, but in these ordinary moments, a young traveler moving through security without experiencing the humiliation that had once been routine, especially for those who looked like her. The torn passport behind glass had transformed from symbol of destruction into reminder of possibility, how systems resist change until precisely the moment they begin to embrace it. The protocol that bore Nadia's name had become something larger than herself, a global standard for how security and dignity could coexist as partners rather than opponents. As Nadia prepared to depart for her next destination, she took one final look at the security checkpoint in operation. What had begun with destruction had led to creation. What had started as humiliation had evolved into dignity for countless travelers who would never know her name or story, but who benefited from the transformation her experience had initiated. The most powerful legacy wasn't the protocol itself, but the principle it embodied, that systems can change when properly challenged, that dignity and security aren't opposing forces but essential partners, and that sometimes transformation begins with a single moment of injustice met not with rage, but with strategic vision for something better. Viewer engagement. What happens when a person with power tries to destroy the identity of someone they know nothing about? A TSA agent, bitter in profiling, sees a young black woman in a hoodie and decides to make an example of her. He rips her passport, stranding her, humiliating her, and telling her she's going nowhere. He didn't know he wasn't talking to a student. He was talking to Nadia Jackson, the brand new CEO of the very airline whose terminal he was standing in. The consequences that came for him weren't just swift, they transformed an industry. This story raises important questions for all of us. Where in your life have you seen power used as a weapon rather than a tool? Have you ever been underestimated based on your appearance, only to later reveal your true capabilities? Or perhaps you've witnessed someone else's dignity being stripped away by someone with momentary authority. We want to hear your experiences. Have you encountered discrimination at security checkpoints or other public spaces? Did anyone document what happened? What resulted from that documentation? How did you respond in the moment? And would you respond differently now? What systems in your community need transformation, similar to what the Jackson Protocol achieved? Your stories matter, not just as personal accounts, but as documentation of patterns that require systematic attention. The experiences you share help identify where transformation is needed next. Have you noticed how documentation changes the outcome of discriminatory incidents? When Emma Fitzgerald began recording Officer Kelly's actions, she wasn't just capturing one moment. She was creating evidence that would ultimately help transform an entire industry. Your phone isn't just a communication device. It's a powerful tool for accountability when used respectfully and strategically. Think about the systems you interact with daily. Which ones prioritize control over dignity? Which ones could be transformed through similar approaches to what Dr. Jackson implemented? Sometimes the most profound changes begin with one person recognizing that a humiliating experience isn't just a personal problem, but evidence of a systematic failure. The most powerful aspect of this story isn't what happened to Officer Kelly. It's how Dr. Jackson redirected her response from individual retribution to systematic transformation, creating change that benefited millions of travelers who would never know her name or story. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story matters, and it might just help someone else find the courage to stand firm in their own dignity, or to recognize opportunities for transformation in systems that currently prioritize power over respect. Resource offering. For those inspired by Dr. Jackson's approach to transformative change, we've developed resources to help you document, analyze, and address dignity violations in your own communities. Know Your Rights Guide. We've created a comprehensive digital handbook explaining your rights during security screenings at airports, border crossings, and other checkpoints. This downloadable PDF includes specific legal protections against document destruction, your right to dignified treatment during security procedures, documentation protocols for when these rights are violated, step-by-step guidance for filing effective complaints, contact information for advocacy organizations by region. Download this free resource through the link in our description to understand exactly what authorities can and cannot do during screening processes. Dignified documentation techniques. Effective documentation is critical for creating accountability. Our guide explains how to record interactions in ways that capture essential evidence without escalating tense situations, protect both your safety and the dignity of all involved, create usable evidence rather than unusable confrontation, establish clear context for what occurred, preserve and share documentation for maximum impact. This isn't about gotcha moments. It's about strategic documentation that drives systematic change rather than just viral outrage. 5 key phrases, common cards sometimes. Maintaining dignity in challenging situations requires precise language. Our printable card provides 5 research-backed phrases that assert your rights without escalating tension. Request appropriate clarification of procedures. Document problematic behavior effectively. Maintain your composure under pressure. Create accountability without confrontation. These phrases, developed with legal experts and conflict resolution specialists, help you navigate difficult situations while preserving both your rights and your dignity. Community building invitation. Systematic change requires collective action. We're building a network of advocates committed to dignity, first approaches in security, public services, and community interactions. Join our community to connect with others working on similar transformations. Access specialized training and resources. Participate in pilot programs testing new approaches. Share successes and learn from challenges. Contribute to evolving best practices. Whether you work within security systems wanting to improve or navigate them as a citizen seeking change, our community provides tools and connections to help create dignified approaches to necessary security. These resources aren't just about protecting yourself. They're about participating in the transformation of systems that currently prioritize control over dignity. Just as Dr. Jackson used her experience to create broader change, your documented experiences and strategic responses can become catalysts for transformation in your community. Visit our website through the link in the description to access these resources and join a growing movement of people committed to reimagining security in ways that honor both safety and human dignity. Preview of next episode, next week. We continue our exploration of transformative responses to discrimination with another remarkable story that demonstrates the power of strategic action over mere reaction. Join us for Board Members Laughed when she presented her breakthrough, then she bought the company. Dr. Melissa Rivera, a brilliant neuroscientist, faced mockery and dismissal when presenting her groundbreaking research to a pharmaceutical board comprised entirely of men who saw only her gender and ethnicity rather than her expertise. Instead of accepting defeat, she leveraged her scientific breakthrough to secure venture capital funding, eventually acquiring the very company that had dismissed her, transforming both its leadership culture and its approach to medical innovation. This episode examines how discrimination in professional settings often masquerades as objective assessment, and how strategic responses can create more profound change than confrontation alone. Dr. Rivera's approach demonstrates another pathway to transformation, using excellence as leverage for systematic change. We'll also explore how the implementation of dignity-centered protocols extends beyond aviation security. The Jackson Protocol has now been adapted for healthcare settings, government services, educational institutions, and corporate environments. Each application demonstrating that respect and effectiveness aren't competing priorities, but complementary ones. Additionally, we'll share exclusive footage from our interview with Emma Fitzgerald, whose documentation of Dr. Jackson's passport destruction catalyzed global change. Now a professional journalist covering civil rights issues, Emma provides unique insight into how ordinary people with smartphones can become agents of accountability and transformation. Subscribe and enable notifications to ensure you don't miss this powerful exploration of how strategic responses to discrimination can transform not just individual careers, but entire industries and the cultures that shape them. Final inspirational message, the story of Dr. Nadia Jackson and the torn passport reminds us of a profound truth. The most dangerous assumption anyone can make is that the person they're choosing to disrespect doesn't have the power to respond. Dignity doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits for the right moment to transform everything. When faced with humiliation or discrimination, we have choices that extend beyond the immediate moment. We can seek personal retribution, or we can recognize opportunities for systematic transformation. The most powerful response isn't always the most obvious one. Sometimes it requires strategic patience and a vision for change that benefits many rather than satisfying our individual desire for justice. Remember, you never know who you're talking to or what capabilities they possess. That person you underestimate, that person you decide to treat with contempt, might just be the one holding the key to your future. A moment of spite can lead to a lifetime of regret. But more importantly, a moment of injustice, when met with wisdom rather than merely rage, can spark changes that ripple far beyond that single encounter. The torn passport behind glass at Newark Airport stands as a reminder that transformation often begins at the precise point where destruction seems complete, that systems resist change until exactly the moment they begin to embrace it. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might benefit from its message, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these powerful narratives of transformation. Drop a comment below with your own experiences or thoughts on creating positive change in the face of injustice. We read every single comment and value your perspective. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next video, exploring how ordinary moments of discrimination can become extraordinary catalysts for lasting change. Thank you for watching. And remember, real transformation begins with the courage to see beyond the immediate moment to the possibilities that lie beyond it.